So I got a request from somebody asking me to do a video on how to build a healthy sense of self as an adult. I'm going to dive into the fabric and explore how to do that. But before I do that, I'm going to preface this by saying that there's a difference between a survival-based childhood, which is an unhealthy childhood, and a healthy childhood. But let me make it very clear that there is no such thing as a perfect childhood. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. Even children that come out of the healthiest childhoods, they still have some level of marring or scathing trauma. So let's explore what a survival-based childhood is, and let's explore what a healthy childhood is. First and foremost, a survival-based childhood is essentially when you don't get the necessary ingredients that you would in a healthy childhood. You don't get the healthy boundaries. You don't get the individuation, differentiation. Those are three things that I will explore much more in depth as we go through this video. And because you don't get those things, you end up getting more marred, more scathed. You end up not developing in that healthy of a way. And it is very important to develop healthy, because if you don't, it affects your entire fucking life. That's the reality of it. So a survival-based childhood is like, say for instance, if you don't get healthy boundaries, maybe you learn that you're responsible for other people's emotions for whatever reason. And then with that, as you grow, and that never changes, you just instead attract people that you are responsible for their emotions. And it's just really messed up because it's not a healthy way of living. As an adult, you are not responsible for any other person and any other person's emotions. That's just the reality of it. A healthy childhood is the opposite. You get those three things. You get the healthy boundaries, the individuation, and the differentiation. So now, with those three things that I mentioned, let's dive into what I like to call the healthy triad of a healthy childhood. Healthy boundaries, that's the first one. Individuation, second. Third is differentiation. And I'll explore all three of those more deeply. Healthy boundaries, imagine you're a child. The healthy way to develop as a child is to develop a healthy, autonomous sense of self that is individuated and differentiated away from other. So you get the healthy boundaries, you get the space to develop as a child autonomously, to explore yourself, to get a better understanding of who you are, your identity, what you like, what you want, all of those things. Imagine getting the space as a child in a healthy way to develop your sense of self, to actually know who you are. And then not only that, but to be contained by an authority figure, a parent. When I say contained, what I'm referring to is emotional containment. Your emotions are not a fucking burden. You can have the healthy mirroring and understand, yes, you do very much so exist. Yes, your emotions very much so exist. You're taught to regulate. It's very important. Let's look at individuation. Individuation is basically, it says it in the name. You are becoming an individual that is separate from the family system that you were raised in. Let's contrast that with enmeshment. Enmeshment is a system where there are not healthy boundaries. Like, everyone's shit is everyone's shit. Everything is basically diffused. The lines are severely blurred. Self and other almost has no differentiation at all whatsoever. And it could very well be absolutely no differentiation, depending on how severe it is. You're becoming an individual. You are individuating. You are developing autonomously your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own behaviors. You are becoming autonomous, separate from the system that you were raised in. That is not only allowed, but also encouraged in a healthy childhood. Differentiation has a lot more to do with like self and other. How you differentiate self and other. Where I begin, where I end, where other begins, where other ends. And the fascinating thing about this too is that when you look at differentiation, you might look at boundaries. Oh, that's my shit. I'm not going to bring it to you. I'm going to bring it to this licensed professional that can help me better understand it and work through it. Now, depending on how healthy and boundaried of intimacy you can develop with another individual, and also understanding that that is a very gradual process and does not happen in 5 motherfucking minutes. It's very important to understand. Anything that happens fast is a red flag and it is unhealthy, and it's likely to not sustain. That's just the reality of it. So, understanding my shit, your shit, that's your shit, not my shit. This is my shit, not your shit. People that lack the healthy differentiation, I guess you could just call it differentiation. People that lack that stuff, they lack healthy boundaries, and they're likely to fucking bring all of their shit to you. And maybe even fuck your mind up or fuck your life up with it. That's the reality of it, because they lack healthy boundaries. And so now, to even further this, I might make a part 2 on this, just because there is absolutely so much to talk about in terms of developing and building a healthy sense of self as an adult, especially if you did not get it in childhood. If you were raised in a survival-based childhood, you did not get any of this stuff. And if you were raised in a survival-based childhood and you don't do anything about the unhealth of you're just going to continue living the same way with the same patterns over and over and over again. Repetition, compulsion, it's all the same thing. Now, so to further explore this even more, I'm going to introduce here in Freudian psychology, psychoanalytic theory. The structure of I know I talk about this all the time. I love it. It's wonderful. The structure of the id, the ego, and the superego. So, to make this very clearly understood, the id is the survival-based life or death entity that is born in every person, period. That's just the way that it is. It's there from the very fucking start, and it's there until the end. And so then you also have the ego state. The ego state is basically like your sense of self, your identity, your personality. Superego is much more based around imagine you have a bird's eye view of yourself. You have this grander view of yourself. I didn't say grandiose. Grander, a view that sees the bigger picture. The superego is much more along the lines of, oh, you should do that. Oh, you should not do that. And basically what essentially ends up happening is that there is the ego state in the middle, and this basically has to balance out the id and the superego. And it can very oftentimes be like a back and forth war dynamic. But let me make things a bit more clear and understood with the id, the survival-based life or death, all or nothing, black or white entity. The id wants instant gratification. Now, imagine if you need to work for something that requires the long term. The id's not going to be happy about that. And it's going to try to get you to do things for short-term gratification. But imagine that like back and forth dynamic between the id and the superego. Instant gratification. Let's fucking wait. Oh, but I want the pleasure now. Yeah, but if you wait, then it gets better. When can I have the pleasure? Be patient. It's literally like that. Now, let me make this very clear. The ego, the ego state, right? You got the id, the ego, the superego. Depending on how you were raised, if you did not get healthy boundaries, if you did not get individuation, differentiation, that affects your ego state. That is all marring and scathing to the ego state. And that ego state is attractive to people that are similar and attracts people that are similar because of those crevices, those slices, those burns, all those different things from the fucked upness of the survival based childhood. You didn't get the healthy boundaries. You didn't get the autonomy with the individuation. You didn't get the understanding and differentiation of self and other with the differentiation element. And so understanding that you need to have those things in place to be able to develop in a healthier way is very important to this. Now, let's say, for instance, you are interested in developing a healthy sense of self as an adult, but you did not have a healthy childhood. When you start to understand that you're probably still attracting based on your survival-based childhood, and that probably everybody that you grew up with is not healthy for you, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's that in and of itself is black or white thinking. They're not good or bad or right or wrong. They're just not healthy. Which, fascinatingly enough, healthy is the theme of this video because you are learning to develop a healthy sense of self, a healthy ego state. But it's important to understand that just because they're not good or bad or right or wrong, they're not bad people. But that also doesn't mean, and you get to choose for yourself. You do. But it will affect your further development. That also doesn't mean that you have to keep them in your life. If somebody is emotionally immature, if they are emotionally unhealthy, the likelihood that they're only going to continue being a further reinforcement of unhealth in your life, contributing to more and more fucked upness, is very high. So we really wouldn't want that at all. We wouldn't want that. Now let me go back again real quick to the id, because it's very important to understand this. The id, depending on how much you might still be stuck in it. Oh, and that's the fascinating thing too about trauma. Depending on when it happened, at what point in your development, you could actually very much be stuck in the id. Like you could literally be all id. And if you are all id, then the way that you experience your life is very fucking severe and extreme. And when I say that, what I'm referring to is that you see literally everything as all or nothing. There are severe fucking imbalances. Your relationships are an absolute shit show because they don't last, because you're using them for means that are unhealthy. And that's just the way that it is. Imagine being stagnated emotionally in infancy. That's essentially what the id is. It's entirely survival based. It's life or death. It needs whatever it needs right now in this very fucking moment, or else. And that's an issue because, one, no, you don't need whatever it is that you need in this moment, even though you think you do, because emotionally, your emotions are communicating to you a life or death, all or nothing survival based experience. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be over if you don't get what it is that you need. It's really an emotional dynamic. It's the id. The id is very emotional. I want it now, but it's like 10 times that. I need it now. No, you don't. You don't need it now. And it's unfortunate too because a lot of people that are very much stuck inside of the id also lack a necessary developed superego. Oh, you shouldn't do that because if you do, I mean, I know that you're emotional about it, but you shouldn't do that because if you do, then you're going to lose that. And you don't want to lose that. No, the id does not give a fuck. It just wants what it wants right in that fucking moment. So developing a healthy sense of self is all about balance. Not too much, not too little. And when I say that the id will make sure that there will be too much or too little, it will make sure that there will be too much or too little. That's the reality of the id, because it is all or nothing. It sees everything in a very black or white way. Something is apparently everything to you, but then it's also, at the same time, nothing to you. It's very out of balance. But that doesn't mean that the id is not going to stay there. The id is going to be there for the rest of your life. And understanding the pleasure principle of the id does not like pain. So with that, the id does what it feels it needs to get rid of pain. Being a healthy adult emotionally requires, well, one, the end goal is a healthy regulated nervous system. The id is not a healthy regulated nervous system. The id is all over the f***ing place. An adult healthy regulated nervous system is very much peaceful and flowing in a very healthy way rather than erratic and all over the fucking place as an id. It's very important to understand that. So how you build a healthy sense of self in adulthood that maybe you didn't get in childhood has everything to do with what I was talking about before in regards to the healthy triad of childhood and giving that to yourself in adulthood. Setting healthy boundaries. You didn't get that in childhood, so now you're going to give that to yourself in adulthood. Give yourself the space to get curious about yourself, discover yourself more, learn more about yourself, figure out what it is that your likes and dislikes are separate from whatever it is that you learned that they are. Because if you were raised in survival, the likelihood that you learned the dynamics of survival, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, using one of them as an example, people pleasing. If you learned to people please, you probably learned to do things that you didn't want to do because you learned that you had to in survival in order to survive. So now you're going to set healthy boundaries and you're going to be like, actually, yeah, I don't want to do those things. I don't even like those things. So I'm not going to. And the likelihood that you will let go of people that you previously saw as, friends, familiar, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Seeing it for what it is the most important thing. If it is unhealthy and they're not doing anything to change, it's entirely your choice. Keeping them in your life is only going to further reinforce the original fucked upness. That's the reality of it. Healthy boundaries, first and foremost. Create them around yourself. Understanding what it is that you are and are not responsible for. If you don't have kids, if you're not married, for starters, you're not responsible for any other adult. You're just not. Adults are adults. They are adults. They're matured. They can take care of themselves. I suppose that this would be a bit more challenging if you have children. But at the very least, you can still... Oh, as an example, if you do have children, set healthy boundaries with them because it teaches both of you. That means they're not responsible for starters. The child is not responsible for the adult for the adult ever, period. The adult is responsible for the child, obviously, but with that, also learning to take space to yourself and to further get curious about yourself and understand the things that you like. That's very important. Other than that, individuating is the next thing. I already talked about these three things, but it's very important. I may very well make a part 2 to this, but because there is a lot to talk about, and I think that a part 2 could be very essential. But anyway, we'll finish it off strong. So healthy boundaries first and foremost. Set them with yourself and other people. What you will do, what you won't do, what you are and are not responsible for. Again, you are not responsible for any other person that is an adult. Their physical well-being, excuse me, their emotions, one of the biggest things. So the next thing, individuation. You becoming an autonomous individual that is separate from your system that you were raised with, your friends, the people that you spend time with, becoming an individual, an autonomous individual that is separate from them. How do you think? What do you feel? How do you behave? Entirely your choice and determined by you. Differentiation. The differentiation between self and other. My shit, your shit. Here's where I begin, here's where I end. This is where you begin, this is where you end. And just understanding that it's really just a matter of recognizing the difference between self and other, allowing yourself to be your own person. And also, let me make this very clear too, because this is probably severely misunderstood by a lot of people. No judgment at all. This is a total safe space. Just here to look at everything for what it is and explore it. If you take this path of developing a healthier sense of self as an adult, you might discover a very fascinating contrast between your newer relationships that are not going to happen right away because it's going to take you time to develop as a healthier adult. But in the future, you might notice, well, I mean, I'd be very surprised if you didn't notice it actually, a wild contrast between the dynamics of your unhealthy relationships and your healthy relationships. Because when you develop healthy sense of, when you develop as a healthy adult emotionally, you do not partake in the same dynamics as you did previously when you were not a healthy adult. When you were an unhealthy adult, what you probably did was, well, because you lacked healthy boundaries, you probably either took responsibility for other people that were adults, or you made other people take responsibility for you. It doesn't matter which way it goes, it's both unhealthy. And the differentiation aspect of it is really just a matter of self and other, my stuff, your stuff. And just kind of understanding how that entire dynamic unfolds. And I would say that the very last thing that I want to focus on in this video, because this is absolutely crucially important. Have you ever done things because you felt like you needed to, not because you enjoyed them, but because you felt like you needed to in order to gain self-worth? It's like you only went to college because you thought it would make you worthy. You only married that person because you thought that it would make you worthy. So let me just clarify something here. Self-worth. There's a difference between intrinsic self-worth and extrinsic self-worth. When you do things because you're looking to those things outside of you to bring you self-worth, that is extrinsic self-worth. You are tying your self-worth to the external. But instead, and this is healthy, extrinsic self-worth is both unhealthy and unstable and unpredictable, and you really don't have a whole lot of control over it. You're going to ruin your fucking life trying to. Or maybe not ruin your fucking life, but you're going to have a very difficult life. Understanding that your self-worth is intrinsic is one of the most important things in terms of the external and how the external does not, what's the word for it? Contribute to your sense of self, your personality, your sense of self-worth. The external does not. You can have relationships, you can do whatever the fuck you want to out there, but understanding that you do not need to tie yourself to anything out there to be worthy is very important. It's very important. Healthy self-worth is intrinsic, and it is not based on a single fucking thing out there. It is determined by self and self alone. And it is healthy because it is stable, it is consistent, it is determined entirely by the self. It's not one of those dynamics where you're like, I have it and it's out there, I'm worthy. Shit, I lost it and it's out there, I'm no longer worthy. No. When you determine your self-worth, you are always worthy, period. There is no turbulence. There is no inconsistency there. Healthy self-worth is intrinsic. Unhealthy, unpredictable, unstable self-worth is extrinsic because it is tied to things out there that are like constantly fucking moving and stuff. No, let's pass on that stuff. So that's really the way that this works. And I think that I will make a part two just because it's very important to understand, like after that first part is introduced, the overall like gradual development of it all and how the consistent gradual process of that unfolds, how a healthy adult is basically developed.